Before we begin, we wish to make it clear that the use of audio editing tools such as noise reduction and speed correction were used in the making of this documentary. Most of the music you are about to hear was sourced from an archive that we feel necessitated the use of these tools. Some music has been sourced from remasters and re-releases and will be substituted as needed. Thank you for understanding, and please enjoy the show.
And now, to an all-musical program.
Time to start today the right way. Music, fellas.
1, 2, 3.
I was really in the groove today.
Hello and welcome to In the Groove. I'm Cade Utterback and this is my show. Folks, I don't know how else to say it. You're in for a real treat this evening. Tonight we'll be discussing the delightful music of Hanna-Barbera's TV cartoons, and I think that by the end of this episode, you'll have a better appreciation for the composers, arrangers, and performers that made that music possible. But first, we need to talk about how Hanna-Barbera came to be. So without further ado, let's groove. The year is 1940. In February, a new Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer cartoon hits theaters. The new short stars a cat named Jasper and a mouse named Jinx in a classic cat-and-mouse scenario. The short is called Puss Gets the Boot, and it turns out to be an overwhelming success for MGM, and the first major success for the two animators that created the cat and mouse, veteran animators William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. They didn't know it at the time, but this short would launch both Hanna and Barbera into the animation spotlight, and over the next 50 years, they would cement themselves as two of animation's most important figures. At the time, Puss Gets the Boot turned out to be a major hit for MGM. Over the next 17 years, the Tom and Jerry series would see massive success. In its initial run, Tom and Jerry won 7 Academy Awards, a feat only matched by Walt Disney's Silly Symphonies in the 1930s. It goes without saying that William Hanna and Joseph Barbera had struck gold with Tom and Jerry, and would do what they could to ride out the success they had for as long as they could. Unfortunately for them, though, the late 1950s saw the beginning of the end for theatrical cartoons, as many studios slowly but surely began to shut down some of their animation departments. These decisions were led by the rapid increase of popularity in a shiny new piece of technology that was sweeping the nation: television. Hanna and Barbera took notice of the rise in TV, but for the time being continued to direct Tom and Jerry shorts for as long as they could. Unfortunately, television won out. It's unclear when exactly Hanna and Barbera stopped working for MGM. While the studio had announced that their animation department would close in 1957, and both Hanna and Barbera would be credited on the final batch of Tom and Jerry shorts leading into 1958, Hanna wrote in his memoir that both he and Barbera had been terminated in 1955. It's confusing to say the least. Regardless of when they left MGM, the two were not discouraged by being fired. In July 1957, the duo established HB Enterprises, their own animation production company, along with extra funding from Screen Gems. They had a strong feeling that television was an untapped market for animation, and they knew that they would need a hit in order to make it. and so they got to work.
Get set, get ready, here comes Rough and Ready. They're tough but steady, always rough and ready.
Premiering in late 1957, The Rough and Ready Show was Hanna-Barbera's first attempt at an animated television program. Starring a cat named Ruff and a dog named Reddy, the series was focused on all the wacky misadventures they would get into. The series was a critical success and ran for 3 seasons with 156 episodes in total. One of the things the series did was introduce Hanna-Barbera's limited animation technique. By designing simplistic characters with key poses and expressions, costs can be saved by reducing frames of animation whenever needed.
Well, you gonna. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, way out there in space so far. I see you every night, you know, on Captain Comet's TV show.
Wouldn't you know it? He's a poet.
The other thing that Rough and Ready did was help introduce the world to Hoyt Curtin, who would go on to help define Hanna-Barbera's legacy in another field, their music. Hoyt Curtin was born on September 9, 1922 in Downey, California. Early in his career, he was a composer for industrial and safety films and television commercials.
Hoyt started out his career writing music for industrial films, like this one about turbines on the Colorado River.
While working on a Schlitz beer commercial in 1957, Curtin met William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, who were producing the commercial for MGM. Interested in Curtin's abilities, the pair later decided to give him a call. In the words of Curtin,
"They were at MGM and I did some commercials, and they happened to be doing the animation on the commercials. That's how I met them. And then a couple of weeks later I got this phone call, and they had this lyric. Said, can you write a tune to this? Yes. So I call them back. It wasn't 5 minutes, I swear. I said, I sing it to you. So I did, and there was silence. And, I figured that it was an albamo. They said, can you record that like yesterday? They were ready to go. They were so busy getting their company started. They just put the music on me, and I got to do any dang thing I wanted to do, and they'd buy it. So that's kind of amazing.
Hoyt soon got hired on at HB Enterprises as the primary musical director. Most of Hanna-Barbera's early TV shows didn't have much original music composed for them, however, so stock libraries were often used for anything other than main titles and end titles and the so-called art cards. Before Hoyt would get the chance to shine as an underscore composer, he would help aid his legacy as a theme song composer with Hanna-Barbera's next TV series, The Huckleberry Hound Show, which debuted in 1958.
And a Huckleberry Hound Dog, howdy!
The show featured 3 different adventures in each episode. First, a story with a title character, Huckleberry Hound, a slow, drawling southern blue hound dog. Second, a segment that featured 2 mice named Pixie and Dixie, who would try and outwit the household cat, Mr. Jinx.
Yours truly in person-like, you know?
And lastly, a story featuring Yogi Bear and his pal Boo Boo, 2 bears that lived in the fictional Jellystone Park, and who would often go in search of what Yogi called picnic baskets.
See you soon in a Huck cartoon.
The Huckleberry Hound Show was the first animated series to win an Emmy when it won one in 1960. Needless to say, Hanna-Barbera had hit it out of the park in just their second year of operating their own company, and part of the success was due to just how marketable Huckleberry Hound was. In addition, the show was sponsored by Kellogg's, so there existed a plethora of advertising featuring the cast of the Huckleberry Hound Show, which would also be the case for many other Hanna-Barbera properties going into the 1960s. One of the most memorable aspects of the Huckleberry Hound Show is its energetic main title song, which was again composed by none other than Hoyt Curtin.
The biggest show in town is Huckleberry Hound for all you guys and gals.
As was common practice for him, Hanna or Barbera would come to him with the lyrics of the song written, but no music to accompany it. That's where Hoyt came in. He managed to give the lyrics a bit of a circus-like theme, even complete with a calliope solo in the last few bars of the song. And thus the Huckleberry Hound theme was born. For the most part, the series relied on stock music from places such as the Capitol High-Q Library, which was also being used in other media projects at the time, such as The Donna Reed Show, and even 6 Warner Brothers cartoons during a musician strike in 1958. While he recorded a few underscore pieces as far back as 1958, 1960 is when Hoyt Curtin is believed to have made his first major sessions of underscore recordings for Hanna-Barbera. Let's take a listen to some of the highlights of his early cues. What's also interesting is that there are 2 cues in our collection that have a weird tape delay effect. And they sound like this. While digging through our archives, we actually found something really cool. Most of the Hanna-Barbera underscore that exists was either recorded in or has only survived in mono sound, which means it was recorded on one channel, the center one. However, in our archive there exist at least 8 Hoyt Curtin recordings that were recorded in stereo. For the first time in history, we're actually able to accurately hear what it sounded like in the HB recording studio. This also helps us picture where the different instrument sections were laid out in the studio. Here are some highlights of some of the cues we found in stereo. Now, one of the cues that was recorded in stereo, Q224 Take 2, is a slower version of a cue that has also been found in mono and has been released as part of an official CD set back in the 1990s. Pretty cool, huh? Hoyt Curtin's early style was very light when it had to be, and a lot of his music from this time was pleasing and sweet to the ear. I've excluded some of the more harsh music and fast-paced chase themes that ran abundant in our collection. Despite this, it's really easy to pick apart his style. It practically screams cartoon, and for the time these pieces were made, about 1958 to 61, they did their job well and are still some excellent pieces of cartoon history. With the success of a show like Huckleberry Hound, many would be left to wonder, where do you go from here? It's likely true that both Hanna-Barbera wondered the same thing. That's why their next series becoming an even bigger hit was such a shock to everyone.
Here we are, Barney boy, costumers. What kind of costume you gonna get? Well, I'm gonna get something that makes me look tall. How about another head? Another one? What do I need 3 of them for?
Beginning development in late 1959, The Flagstones was meant to be the first primetime, mature-oriented animated sitcom on TV. Based on the characters of the 1950 sitcom The Honeymooners, the series would revolve around Fred Flagstone, his wife Wilma, and his neighbor Barney Rubble and his wife Betty. After a bit of development hell and Joe Barbera having trouble even selling the show in the first place,
but nobody bought it. I mean, you can go along and do this, which I did for 8 straight weeks. Pitch, 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 sometimes 5 a day.
The series premiered on September 30th, 1960 on ABC. Only, it wasn't called The Flagstones anymore. Sometime during the show's development, it changed to The Gladstones. Then it settled on its final name, The Flintstones. Oh yeah, that's a T right there. The series was a smash hit right out of the gate, and quickly became even more of a cultural icon than Huckleberry Hound could have ever dreamed of. The show was so popular that Neil Armstrong was reported to have said Fred Flintstone's iconic catchphrase, "Yabba Dabba Doo," while on the surface of the moon in 1969. In another instance, Jackie Gleason, who played Ralph Cramden on The Honeymooners, was going to sue Hanna-Barbera, but decided against it only because he didn't want to be known as, quote, the guy who yanked Fred Flintstone off the air. During its initial run, the series ran for 6 seasons, 166 episodes, and it even got an animated feature-length movie.
Flintstones, meet the Flintstones, they're the modern Stone family.
One of the things that many people remember the Flintstones for was its catchy theme song, dubbed Meet the Flintstones. But hold on, there's something interesting about that theme. The truth is, that wasn't the first theme song for the series. In fact, it wasn't used until the 3rd season. Yes, for the first 2 seasons of The Flintstones, which aired from 1960 to 62, the theme song consisted of a vibrant, fast-paced, xylophone-laden piece called Rise and Shine. The theme was even given lyrics in a 1961 children's album.
Rise and shine, when you're happy, you're doing fine.
By the time that The Flintstones premiered, Hoyt Curtin was finally able to flex his creative muscles even more than before, as he was now a full-time composer for Hanna-Barbera shows airing at the time. This meant that he was tasked with writing various underscores and cues for The Flintstones, something that he was very good at. A very talented composer, Hoyt was able to take a melody such as Meet the Flintstones and give it many different musical phrases to exist in. If he could find a way to adapt it, he would. Here are some of the portions of the original recordings for the versions of Rise and Shine used in the show. First, here are 2 recordings which, when properly spliced together, create the full version of the main title. Here's the pre-credits cue, which would air before the credits. And here's the version of Rise and Shine used for the end titles, which was made up of 2 recordings. Also buried within the archive, there's some evidence to suggest that the version of Rise and Shine we know today wasn't even the first one considered. We managed to find 3 tracks that make up a different set of main and end titles that likely predate the final one. Now that we're done talking about the main titles, end titles, openings, credits, and all that jazz, let's take some time to listen to some of the various underscore cues he created that remix that melody. Listen carefully and see if you can hear the ways that the melody shifts and gets altered. With the start of Season 3, the Flintstones had a new theme song. So why exactly did Rise and Shine get replaced? While there is no definitive answer, most people speculate that the theme sounded too similar to the theme from The Bugs Bunny Show, which also aired on ABC at the time.
Oh, my children, cut the lights. This is it, the night of nights.
I don't know if this is actually true, but it's an interesting theory regardless. The theme that was chosen to replace Rise and Shine was Meet the Flintstones. It wasn't created as a replacement, though. It had actually been a melody that Hoyt Curtin had been using in his underscore as far back as the first season.
Come on, Fran. Make a wish and blow out the candle.
Okay. Let's see. I wish... yeah.
In fact, Curtin liked the theme so much that it was the favorite one he ever wrote. He told the Los Angeles Times in 1994, "It's a catchy little tune, just a simple thing arranged for jazz and singers." Over the years, the Flintstones' original theme fell into obscurity, and to this day it remains largely forgotten and overshadowed by the more popular Meet the Flintstones theme. With the overwhelming popularity and recognition of Meet the Flintstones, though, maybe it's for the best that the world never heard Rise and Shine again, although it did have its fair share of imitators. Just like he did with Rise and Shine, Hoyt was able to remix Meet the Flintstones in many ways. In fact, there exist far more cues containing this theme than there are cues for Rise and Shine. Let's take a listen to some of his cues with this melody. Of course, not every piece of music composed for the show had to use the Rise and Shine or Meet the Flintstones melodies, and Hoyt knew this just as well as anyone. Here are some examples of cues that did not rely on either melody, but are still super fun pieces to listen to. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? Some of Hoyt Curtin's best work was done while on the Flintstones, but admittedly there are a lot of cues that don't seem to stand up as well as others. The Flintstones seem to be a great test environment for Hoyt's composing skills, especially since he finally got to do more than just making theme songs. But when it came to actually showing off what he was truly capable of, he luckily wouldn't have to wait very long at all.
The most effectual top cat, who's intellectual.
In September 1961, Top Cat premiered to little fanfare. Despite being a ratings failure and only lasting for one season of 30 episodes, Top Cat features some of the best that Hoyt Curtin had to offer. And part of this was because he embraced one of the musical genres he was best at, jazz. Set in a Manhattan alley, the show revolved around a gang of cats led by, who else? Top Cat, who would constantly come up with schemes to either get rich quick or simply get a nice meal, much to the chagrin of the local policeman, Officer Dibble. The setting of a Manhattan alley helped play into the jazz feel, and Hoyt Curtin absolutely cranked out some great pieces to coincide with the characters and settings. What's interesting to note is that Curtin couldn't have known whether or not a show would succeed, but even when this was the case, he managed to come up with some truly great pieces of music. It's almost a shame that these were meant to be buried underneath bits of dialogue and sound effects. Let's take a listen to some samples of his cues from the show, and as we go along, try and picture a sleazy laid-back alley where some cool cats come to gather. I could have sworn I've heard this one before. And this one definitely sounds familiar too. Huh, must be my imagination. In addition to those sleazy laid-back jazz cues, Hoyt Curtin also created some that embody busy, hustling streets of Manhattan, such as these. Call me biased, but I absolutely love Hoyt Curtin's jazz style. I think that his best work came from the need to be jazzy, and with a cartoon like Top Cat, I'd say that he absolutely nailed it. While Top Cat was a bit of a forgotten failure in the United States, the show became so popular in Latin America, especially Mexico, that 2 CGI movies based on the show were released in 2011 and 2015 respectively. The movies even pulled in a total of almost $20 million in the box office. Neat. By far, my favorite pieces of Hoyt Curtin music come from his Top Cat underscores. However, I think his work on this show often gets overlooked by a different one. A show that went in a completely different direction for Hanna-Barbera. A show that entered the world of action. I'm speaking, of course, about Johnny Quest. Johnny Quest premiered in 1964, and the series was unique not only because it was Hanna-Barbera's first attempt at action, but also because the series had the look and feel of a comic book come to life, which was in large part due to its creator, Doug Wildey, who was, you guessed it, a comic book artist. The show only lasted for one season of 26 episodes, but its legacy has remained very intact over the past 60 years. The thing that many fans of Johnny Quest loved the most about the series was its incredible soundtrack. The combination of lighthearted 50s sitcom-esque cues contrasted with the intense rip-roaring heaps of action cues helped cement the show's soundtrack as an integral part of its identity for decades. In fact, the music of the show is beloved so much that a 2-CD soundtrack set was released in 2016 by La La Land Records. This release contains over 2.5 hours of music from the series, and nearly 6 years later it remains the only Hanna-Barbera show to get a soundtrack release of this magnitude. Johnny Quest has also had 2 unofficial soundtrack releases that have been floating around for a while now, and these releases are impressive in their own right. Hoyt Curtin often called the Johnny Quest theme one of the hardest pieces he ever wrote, saying things like, "Johnny Quest is impossible to play on the trombone. JQ used 6 bones because it was so tough to play. The competition among those top players was too much. And even, I had to stay in the booth because I was laughing so hard, watching my buddies, the bone players, trying to cut that tune. Nobody would quit, of course. It was written in the worst possible key for trombones. Love it." Personally, I've always enjoyed Curtin's Top Cat cues more than anything else, but my opinion seems to be an unpopular one. A vast majority of people think that Hoyt Curtin did his absolute best work on Johnny Quest, effectively giving him his magnum opus after only 5 years as Hanna-Barbera's musical director. And I suppose that they have a point. I mean, if people love the soundtrack so much to go so far as to bootlegging it twice, it must be pretty good, right? Well, I'll let you decide. Here are some samples of some of the action-packed anthems of Johnny Quest's 26-episode run. And here are some samples of the lighthearted, easy listening cues that also line the soundtrack. You might have noticed that I didn't include the text underneath the track title that lists the composer, and there's a good reason why. Keen eyes might have already noticed a second name on that La La Land Records cover, Ted Nichols. Sometime in 1963, Ted Nichols, whose real name is Theodore Nicholas Sflatsis, Gesundheit by the way, was hired on as a musical director for Hanna-Barbera. His job during this early period was to assist Hoyt Curtin, but every now and then he'd get his chance to compose. His first major project was Johnny Quest, alongside Hoyt of course. Because record keeping and record access is a pain in the butt, especially for music that was made for an animation studio nearly 60 years ago, we're still not entirely sure what Nichols composed and what Curtin composed, although one thing we definitely know is that Curtin composed the iconic theme song that swings so hard it makes Tarzan jealous. So while we don't know to what extent Ted Nichols' music played in Johnny Quest, his legacy wouldn't be defined by his participation on that show. Instead, his legacy would be created by a bit of a shake-up at Hanna-Barbera. Up until 1965, Hoyt Curtin had done everything right for the studio. He had been there since pretty much the beginning of their TV years, and was the head honcho behind some of the most catchy tunes and swinging beats on TV. But something would soon change. Sometime in 1965, Hoyt Curtin decided to take a break from being the primary musical director at Hanna-Barbera. We're still not sure why to this day. But with Curtin stepping away, Ted Nichols became the primary musical director for the company. A promotion that came with a lot of pressure. So how did Ted do? During his first year in the primary musical director role, Nichols was responsible for composing the score for the sixth and final season of The Flintstones, and he also composed the music for the feature-length film The Man Called Flintstone in 1966.
The Man Called Flintstone, that's who.
Later on in 1966, Ted Nichols tackled the theme music for one of Hanna-Barbera's next action shows, Space Ghost. The show only lasted one season of 20 episodes, and largely remained forgotten until the series and some of its characters were repurposed for the mid-1990s Cartoon Network series Space Ghost Coast to Coast, which was quite the far cry from its action's origins, but saw far more success than the original series.
And do you, Space Ghost, take this woman to... Oh no!
A similar thing happened with Birdman and the Galaxy Trio in 1967, which also only lasted 20 episodes. While the show faded into obscurity at first, the revival of the characters for the early 2000s Adult Swim series Harvey Birdman Attorney at Law gave them more popularity and a different setting and plot than its action-oriented roots.
And of course, this.
You know, Scoob, it just dawned on me. Scooby Dooby. Okay.
Other shows that Ted Nichols did music for during this time included The Herculoids, The Fantastic Four,
starring Reed Richards, Sue Richards, Johnny Storm, Ben Grimm,
The New Adventures of Huck Finn,
You put the dream up, big river's calling you. Listen, my friend, follow that river, that mighty river. There's
and Wacky Races. Wacky Races itself spawned two spin-offs that Nichols did music for, one being The Perils of Penelope Pitstop, and the other being Dastardly and Muttley and Their Flying Machines, which most people remember simply as Stop That Pigeon.
So, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon.
It seemed at the time like Hanna-Barbera was trying to make a franchise out of Wacky Races and its characters, but while they focused on Wacky Races, the series that would actually become a sensation was being developed behind closed doors. In the middle of 1968, Fred Silverman, the CBS daytime programming executive at the time, was looking for a show that would be a success for both their Saturday morning block and parental watchdog groups that were concerned with the violence in many Saturday morning cartoons of the time. He turned to the popular show The Archies for inspiration. He wanted to use the bubblegum pop teen band element of that show, and wanted to combine it with the concept of solving mysteries. His version of that concept was called House of Mystery. Joe Barbera saw potential in the idea. The concept was passed along to Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, two story writers who had been working for Hanna-Barbera for almost a decade at that point. Also in on the idea was designer Iwao Takamoto. The team assembled a pitch for a show called Mysteries 5, in which a group of teens would play in a band part of the time and solve mysteries when they weren't. There were 5 teens: Jeff, Mike, Kelly, Linda, and WW, with their bongo-playing dog, Too Much. Their pitch was rejected. The team then decided to make some changes. For starters, they cut one of the teens and renamed the rest. Jeff became Fred, Kelly became Daphne, Linda became Velma, and WW became Shaggy. They also focused less on the band aspect and more on the mysteries. This new version, renamed to Who's Sissa Scared, was also rejected by CBS for fears that the show might be too scary for children. The team had one last chance to pitch the show, but again they had to make some changes. First and foremost, the band element was dropped. Second, the team focused more on adding comedic elements to the show. Lastly, Too Much, the dog who had formerly been a bongo player, was renamed. The story goes that Fred Silverman, who Fred was named after by the way, was listening to Frank Sinatra's Strangers in the Night on a flight and heard and later told the team that Scooby-Doo should be the dog's new name. And as a quick aside, let me just say that Frank Sinatra didn't have the only lyric from around that time that might have inspired Silverman. After all of the elements were again reworked, the show was retitled to Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, and was finally greenlit for production in early 1969.
Mystery fans, hold on to your ghosts, cause here come the spookiest, most spine-tingling tales ever to chill a bone. Delight and fright, shiver and shake, quiver and quake. Watch Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?
Premiering later in the year on September 13, 1969, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Was a major hit for Hanna-Barbera and quickly became their most popular show since the Flintstones had ended in 1966. And also like the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? Had 2 separate theme songs. The original theme for the show was this mysterious fast-paced theme composed by Ted Nichols. This theme was used sporadically in Season 1. Sometimes it was used for the opening titles, sometimes the end titles, sometimes both. But it gets really complicated, and part of the reason is that Hanna-Barbera decided to introduce another theme song for the show. This one was composed by David Mook and Ben Raleigh, and it was performed by Larry Marks. You might be more familiar with this one.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now. Where are you? We need some help from you now.
When Season 2 rolled around, Hanna-Barbera decided to keep the David Mook and Ben Raleigh version, but got the theme to be re-recorded with Austin Roberts on vocals.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We got some work to do now.
This was significant too, as Roberts also sang vocals for the bubblegum pop chase music that was featured in the second season.
Yesterday I got to dreaming about a recipe for my love.
But I'm not done confusing you yet. No, instead I'd like to make this whole story even more interesting by mentioning that the Mook-Raleigh version of the theme, the one that everyone knows, might have itself been a ripoff of a bubblegum pop hit from 1967. Yeah, the Scooby-Doo theme song rabbit hole goes a long way, so I won't harp on it too long. Part of the reason I even bring this up is because of what Ted Nichols would do for his underscore for the series. Remember that melody he composed for the theme song? Well, he also used it in his underscore. A lot. Which is why you might have recognized the melody, but not known why. Courtesy of our archives, here are some examples of his use of that melody. Cool, isn't it? That melody does show up a lot, but it isn't the only one. Some of the music we have in our archive also makes use of the melody for the song Clementine. There's also these two pieces that share their own similar melody, which you can hear if you listen closely. And of course, there are some of the other pieces of music that don't recycle a melody, but are still recognizable. Lastly, there's at least one cue that was composed for the show but never got used. However, this particular cue resurfaced when it was remixed for What's New Scooby-Doo in 2002.
Come on, you two. It's getting late.
Ted Nichols' Underscore is what I consider to be a near-perfect set of music for a cartoon. It's perfect for the show it was in. You can't tell me that it doesn't help set the mood. There are a few tracks that run for a few minutes and have several sections, and the music editors knew that this was a bonus as they mixed and matched parts from all the tracks to make a beautiful Frankenstein's monster of a music bed in each episode. Nichols' Scooby-Doo music was so perfect that it continued to be used in every Scooby-Doo series until 1985.
Scoob! Look out! It's the Shadow Demon!
It was also very popular outside of the show it was in. In the 2000s, some tracks from the Underscore popped up in other shows, such as Family Guy,
Swamp Monster!
and Time Squad.
Anybody home?
even after Scooby-Doo Where Are You's second season ended in 1970, Ted Nichols would continue to work on shows such as Josie and the Pussycats,
Josie and the Pussycats, long tails and ears for hats, guitars and sharps and flats,
and the Pebbles and Bam Bam Show.
Nothing is as groovy as the boom 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 on the band with the bedrock beat.
Just as quickly as he had entered Hanna-Barbera, so too did he leave it. In 1972, Ted Nichols left Hanna-Barbera to pursue his own personal interests, which included writing operas and gospel works. This didn't leave Hanna-Barbera in a state of panic, however, as they knew exactly who to turn to. A familiar face whose name you're probably tired of hearing me say. That's right, the mighty Hoyt Curtin made his return in 1972. While Hoyt took a step back from being the primary musical director from 1965 to 72, he didn't leave the company entirely. In fact, he helped co-write the theme songs for the two shows I mentioned a moment ago, Josie and the Pussycats and the Pebbles and Bam Bam Show. His first big project back in the spotlight, however, would be for a series that he hadn't composed for yet, Scooby-Doo.
Hey, Scooby!
The new series was The New Scooby-Doo Movies, an hour-long show that saw the Mystery Inc. gang tackle the same spooky mysteries with the added twist of a guest celebrity or other fictional character helping them. Big names at the time such as Don Knotts, Tim Conway, Jerry Reed, Phyllis Diller, Sonny and Cher, Mama Cass Elliot, Dick Van Dyke, and even the Harlem Globetrotters guest starred on the show. In addition, fictional characters such as the Addams Family, Josie and the Pussycats, and Batman and Robin also made appearances on the show. With a new show came a new theme song, and Hoyt Curtin's take on Scooby-Doo was both mysterious and entertaining. The theme song starts out brooding and menacing, but embraces a bit of the comedy and appeal of Scooby-Doo's characterization.
Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo, where are ya?
In addition, it introduces a new melody that, with one exception, would be used in every major Scooby-Doo series for 12 years afterwards.
Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo, where are ya? Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo, where are ya?
Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo, where are ya? Scooby-Doo, looking for you. Scooby-Doo, where are you?
And this melody would also be reflected in some of the new music that Hoyt composed for the series. I think that while Hoyt was still a strong composer at this point, his music during this period seemed to be not at the level that his previous work was at, and he would never truly recapture the magic of his early career. Despite this, though, he was still a strong composer and continued to be one until the end of his career. We don't have anything else in our archives to showcase, as all of our music ends after the new Scooby-Doo movies does in 1974. However, we feel it necessary to at least tell you what happened to Hanna-Barbera, Hoyt, and Ted. Throughout the 1970s, Hanna-Barbera controlled a vast majority of the animation market, especially the Saturday morning cartoon time slot. The decade was marked by a slew of Scooby-Doo clones that never caught on, as Scooby-Doo itself kept on trucking. Some other standout shows from the 1970s include the Super Friends,
In the Great Hall of the Justice League,
Hong Kong Phooey,
#1 super guy.
Jabberjaw, and even a new take on Popeye, a franchise that Hanna-Barbera did not itself create.
I'm strong to the finish, 'cause I eat space spinach.
By the end of the decade, Hanna-Barbera was still on top of the cartoon market, but the 1980s would prove tough to compete in. They had one last trick up their sleeve, however, and it came in the form of a bunch of little blue people.
Saturday mornings, turn on the fun, excitement, and adventures of all your favorite pals.
The 1980s saw the rise in commercial cartoons whose sole purpose was to sell a product. This is why a lot of the most popular and memorable cartoons of the decade were based around toy lines or popular video games. G.I. Joe, Transformers, Care Bears, the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. Cartoons in the 1980s were a form of marketing, and one of the first popular cartoons of the decade was one that would become a marketing giant in itself. 1981's The Smurfs. The Smurfs was already an established series overseas, and was the product of a Belgian cartoonist who went by Peyo. It was brought to the US in this cartoon adaptation, and it quickly became a cultural icon of the decade. The show lasted for a whopping 9 seasons and 258 episodes, becoming Hanna-Barbera's longest series. The theme song for The Smurfs utilized a theme which a lot of people have come to know as the La La song. As for the show itself, the score relied heavily on pieces of classical music, and the use of strings in the Hanna-Barbera orchestra was present more than ever before. For being Hanna-Barbera's last major success, The Smurfs was a pretty high note to go out on, and Hoyt must have thought so too, as he finally retired for good in 1986, 3 years before The Smurfs ended in 1989. And this time, he really was done, I swear. Hanna-Barbera had a few good shows here and there throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s aside from The Smurfs, one of the more notable being a pup named Scooby-Doo. But they also had far more clunkers than ever before. I mean, come on, Yo Yogi? Really?
Yo, Yogi, yo! From Jellystone Park to Jellystone Mall, yo, Yogi, yo! Yogi's having a ball!
The last sole Hanna-Barbera show to air on TV was Dumb and Dumber, an adaptation of the movie of the same name. By the early to mid-90s, Hanna-Barbera had effectively become a shell of its former self, and the company would have to live on in a different way. And it would take the man behind CNN and TBS to help this become a reality. In 1986, American entrepreneur Ted Turner acquired MGM's library of film and TV shows. This included their cartoons. By 1988, he had also acquired a portion of Warner Brothers cartoons and Popeye cartoons. And in 1991, with a bid of $320 million, Ted Turner bought the entire Hanna-Barbera library. The next year, Cartoon Network launched as a location to house all of the cartoons he now had.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the world's first and only Cartoon Network.
Under the new banner of Cartoon Network Studios, Hanna-Barbera would serve as a vehicle for animators and creators to showcase their visions in the form of the What a Cartoon Show in 1995. The show was a shorts program and featured 7-minute shorts that served as possible pilots for future series.
You will be indirectly responsible for the resulting euthanasia.
Oh boy, they got enough kids over there as it is.
And by doing so, it gave Cartoon Network its first major successful shows. Shows you might have heard of. Dexter's Laboratory, Johnny Bravo, Cow and Chicken, and the Powerpuff Girls all came from the What a Cartoon show, and they also happened to be the last shows that Hanna-Barbera had a part in producing. Sadly, William Hanna passed away in 2001, and not too long after his passing, Hanna-Barbera was absorbed into Warner Brothers Animation, effectively serving as the true end to the company. While its legacy still lives on, Hanna-Barbera these days is not much more than a logo and the weight and memories that it carries. As for Joe Barbera, he passed away in 2006. So what happened to the other players in our story? As for Ted Nichols, he's still kicking at age 93. He last gave an interview to the Williams Grand Canyon News in 2013, and he currently resides in Williams, Arizona. We were unable to make contact with Ted Nichols as he doesn't have much of an online presence, and we couldn't find many leads to follow. I hope that he's doing well, and I hope he looks back fondly on his work on The Man Called Flintstone, Space Ghost, and of course, the first Scooby-Doo series. Following his retirement in 1986, Hoyt Curtin continued enjoying his life until his death on December 3, 2000 at the age of 78. In his later years, he gave more interviews and always seemed happy to talk about his experiences. He always lamented never getting much recognition for his work, but he was always quick-witted and kind-hearted to all who ever called him their hero. All he ever wanted was to be popular for the work he did, but he admitted late in life that he was just happy knowing that people the world over still hum the theme from the Flintstones and the Jetsons, and that his work on some of the Scooby-Doo series helped entertain generations. All Hoyt Curtin ever wanted was to be recognized for his work. Heck, I doubt that most of you didn't even know his name or that he existed before you saw this documentary. So if nothing else, I hope that I was able to bring some attention to a man whose legacy is often overshadowed by the legacy of the company for which he worked. I wasn't even born before Hoyt Curtin passed away, but I've spent the past few years becoming more familiar with him and his work, and I sometimes wish that I could have met him and had a conversation with him. There's no telling how much charm and wisdom he'd have to share. Still, while I can't talk with him, I know how to speak his language. All I have to do is put on some headphones and listen to the Flintstones. In my journey to discovering Hoyt Curtin's music, there's one thing I've learned about him. He is, to me, one of music's forgotten geniuses. Don't believe me? Well, maybe you should ask Joe Barbera.
And so for now, we close the Hoyt Curtin songbook.
The Flintstones have a yabba dabba do time, a dabba do time. We'll have a great old time.
Take 3 and title.
1, 2, 1.
Okay.